Hi again. Welcome back to Breakfast All Day.
Aloha.
Aloha. So now we're going to talk about a documentary that premiered on HBO on Monday night, and it's called The Inventor Out for Blood in Silicon Valley. And this is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, who's a straight up grifter, and we know that now. We didn't know that at the time, but she founded this company called Theranos, which supposedly was doing this revolutionary blood testing. All you to do, according to her theory, her business model was, instead of going through really complicated blood tests, drawing from your veins, it was just a tiny little finger prick. And they could do like 200 plus blood tests for various diseases and conditions.
Instead of needing a giant industrial lab, all you would need was, the idea was that they were going to shrink down that lab and that entire methodology down to something basically the size of a desktop laser printer.
Right. And it was called the Edison because Elizabeth Holmes was a great admirer of Thomas Edison. Right. So,
who in no way was a charlatan at all sometimes.
So, she became this really like worshipped and acclaimed figure and was buddy with like the Obamas and the Clintons and all kinds of really influential and esteemed people who were on the board of Theranos, and they viewed her as the future, and she modeled herself after people like Steve Jobs, revolutionaries like Steve Jobs. She had this daily wardrobe of a black turtleneck and black pants, and she wore that every day, and her hair was pulled back the same way every day. And she had this intensity that matched people like that who have really changed the world with technology. And supposedly she would spend like 20 hours a day at work, and she never slept.
Right. The reason she gives for having a closet full of, 8 versions of the same pair of pants and the same turtleneck and the same jacket is that she would then not have to worry about what she's wearing and stay focused on the project.
I don't have time. I just don't have time. So she
there's always time for fashion.
So as we've learned, she was a total freaking grifter, and she made all this up. She totally faked the lab results and was actually, putting the blood tests into third-party giant blood machines to get the results. And then there were vast disparities between what regular people would get when they went to the Theranos pinprick places at Walgreens versus what real doctors had established. And so this is an Alex Gibney documentary that lays all of that out.
Yeah, this on a certain level hit somewhat close to home for me, having been working on the internet for 30 years.
Okay.
Or 20 years.
Okay, so how so?
Because I know what that Silicon Valley mentality is like. Mm-hmm. They talk about the move fast, break stuff mentality of Silicon Valley, which is true, right? I mean, we all know that. But there's also that, there's an arrogance and a hubris in that, if you are the type of person that starts to bring up hey guys, this may not be reality. There's one of the people talks about how, when they start bringing up, one of the engineers is talking about the laws of thermodynamics mean that we can't make this work in this tight of space. And the response is basically, well, maybe you're not Theranos material, right? And it's
it's a cult. You don't want to ever question the authority here, right?
Right. So there's some of that. It's that idea, there's a, not everyone in Silicon Valley is like this, but there is a certain mindset sometimes that it's everybody who is done something the same way forever is an idiot. And I've come along and I've come up with this new way, and the only reason people are fighting it is because they don't want to look dumb. And it's or sometimes people have actually already worked out the bugs and tried the thing you're trying, and there's a reason they don't do that, right?
Well, over and over again, you hear the mantra, fake it till you make it. And that is literally what she was doing.
Right. But it's interesting because one of the things, because they keep talking, Gibney talks to this behavioral economist who talks about some interesting experiments, right, with the dice.
Oh, right.
Right. And I found that, and the way he talks about that experiment and the reasons, where people are willing to be dishonest in a way that they think they're doing good, it somewhat, in my mind, explains how Theranos got where they were. Because I didn't get the sense that they started out to be a fraud.
No.
Right?
She had an idea.
Right.
And it just didn't come together.
And it was
and then billions had been invested.
Right. And it's and there's a line towards the end where somebody says, you set these goalposts and you're just like, well, we'll figure out how to get there. And, what can happen sometimes, and I've seen this happen, is that, oh, well, we need to act like it's working to keep our investment going, right? Like,
and then eventually we'll figure it out.
And eventually, like, we just need more of a runway. So we're going to show, this was kind of fascinating. I was really intrigued by this.
Did you know very much about her prior to this?
I didn't start hearing about this until the news started to break, like, oh, there's this big company that turns out none of their stuff works. Yeah. And then you read the story like, they're trying to make this machine, and in order to pass testing, they're running all the tests through competitor machines. Like, that's not right.
That's fraud.
Right? That's
and she's a really interesting figure too, because she was like the world's youngest billionaire. Of course, it was all achieved fraudulently, but beyond like the wardrobe, she
has this really deep voice. It almost sounds like she's putting on a fake voice to sound like she's much more serious than she really is.
And there's controversy about how they don't really cover it in the movie, but there's, since then, there are some people that have worked with her for years who are like, oh, no, that's not how she sounds.
Right.
And then her family's like, oh, no, she's always sounded like that.
Yeah, sure thing. And it's funny to see the comparisons that have come up as to who she sounds like. I've seen the comparison to the Fred Armisen voice in The Californians. What are you doing here? Like that. And also she sounds kind of like when Mira Sorvino in Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion, when she goes back to her high school reunion and says, I invented Post-its. She kind of sounds like that too. And she also doesn't blink. She has these giant blue eyes. She's tall and blonde, and she has these big blue eyes, and she just stares at you. And one thing Alex Gibney does here that is super creepy is that he plays with her image. He like manipulates and like morphs her image from things and into things, and it's deeply disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff too. Like, they'll have these company meetings, and the guy Sonny that it turns out discover is the 48-year-old that she's been dating, which
he left his wife for her.
Right, left his wife for her, which I don't think gets covered in the movie, but they. They were dating for a long time, and then going on these investment trips and, to raise investment and not telling anyone that they were together. But he would have these company meetings where they're, oh, everybody's against us, but if you're here, we're believing in something and we've got a vision, and it's this like rah thing with the whole company. And it's like in a way that you never get at a, like, I don't want to call it real company, but a more traditional company. Like, you never get the founders coming out and being like, hey, everybody, this is the, I can tell you, like, I've been in those meetings, and it's just like,
right.
Like, come on. Like, can we just get back to work, please?
One of the funniest scenes is when they win, like, the tiniest, bittiest victory, and they come, and Elizabeth Holmes and Sonny, the COO, come dancing out to Can't Touch This, to MC Hammer, You Can't Touch This. Right. And it's so exquisitely awkward, like watching them dance and like raise the roof. It's super dorky. And at one point, what are they yelling? Like, fuck them, or fuck somebody.
It's a big fuck you, because they're talking about like whoever's after them, whoever's against them.
Right. It's a cult.
Right. There's that, like, you got to drink the Kool-Aid. And then they start talking about how the company ends up so siloed because they're so worried about leaks, and because there's such pressure to make this work, that nobody's talking to each other, right? And so that, look, in my mind, that's half their problem, right? I mean, it's easy to
not
cast stones
communicating.
And one of the guys says this, like, one of the people that they talk to, like, you've got the engineers working on the mechanics, and then you've got the chemists and the people who understand, kind of the chemistry that needs to happen with the blood tests, working on another thing. And they're not talking to each other, right? And so, of course, you get pieces, and when they show, like, they show all these beautiful, like, motion graphics as to what the machine looks like inside, and then you start seeing, like, here's the problems we had. And you're like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is an Alex Gibney movie, and his films, whether it's the Enron documentary or the Scientology documentary, Going Clear, he's done so many films, and he goes deep, and you often feel like you're cramming for a final exam when you're watching his movies, because they're so densely packed with information. This is not the case here. I don't feel like he's more interested in the cultural personality of her here. to the extent that he doesn't necessarily dive as deep into her culpability, perhaps, or who she really is and what her real flaws are. I think he's more interested in like the swirl of bullshit that she created and sort of gawking at how that's emblematic of Silicon Valley as a whole, versus like really getting down to, I don't think he nails her hard enough here, truly.
I'm not sure he does either, although, we get towards the end of it and you find out, like, even after, like, even in, she pleads not guilty in court, and, like, I don't know, and I haven't checked the news in the last 6 months, but, like, I get the sense coming away from this doc that, like, she was still saying, oh, no, this is going to work. Like, she's not going to give up, right? Like, she's so down the rabbit hole, like, there is nothing else, right?
That's one of the questions is, like, does she truly believe that? Like, has she told the same lie so many times that she actually believes it? Who knows?
What I do like, though, is that when, if this movie is really, and again, I think you've got a good point, is that this movie does do a really good job of talking about that cult of personality and how dangerous it is and how everyone can go along with this kind of cult aspect and this without questioning it. And some of the people he talks to are, especially the guy from Forbes.
Right, the guy from Forbes and the guy from the New Yorker who both did big pieces on her.
And you see the guy from Forbes, like, a couple of times, like, he's right on the edge of crime.
Right.
And I found that, I was like, whoa, this is a guy who is devastated because he knows he should have known better.
Right, he's a seasoned reporter.
Right, and, a little bit is like you see, because so many, like, everybody on that board, there's all these powerful, like Schultz,
George Schultz,
and
former Secretary of State George Schultz.
Right, like all these like real powerful, like James Mattis, right? Like, the general and
before he was defense secretary. Yes.
Right, all these really, and you have to wonder a little bit, like, how much are these old guys charmed by this young blonde, right? And there has to be some of that, but she's also that intense. But I also like when they're talking to the various kind of angel investors, right? The ones that come in early and go on their gut, right? And have one of these guys that's a lot older that should know better and does this thing like, well, her grandfather was a entrepreneur, and on the other side of her family, somebody ran a hospital. So she's got entrepreneur and medical in her blood, and that's why. And it's like, wait a minute, no.
That's not good enough.
Like my grandparents, I have an uncle that was in the grocery business. That doesn't mean anything. I know anything about groceries. Like, all I know is going to the store. Like, I worked one summer. I still don't know anything about groceries. So the idea, like, to see those investors talk that way, and that's how they make their decisions, you're like,
they were all duped.
Well, it's not like they're all just gamblers, right? Like it's like, I mean, it's the same rigor. I would love to hear Ben's take on this. It's the same rigor, like when you look at the horses in the horse race, like, well, I think that horse is ready to win. Like, on what? Well, he looks peppy in the paddock. Okay, but that doesn't mean he's fast. Well, I got a good feeling.
Yeah, it's on HBO. It's really fascinating as a snapshot of like where we are now, but also as just an individual single story. The fact that she was able to pull all of this off is just insane. I do wish he had gone deeper on her. I do wish he had held her a little more liable. I don't know. It's not as hard hitting as I would have expected from Alex Gibney, but it's entertaining. It's glossy. It moves beautifully.
And one of the things that's fascinating is they cover a little bit of how, after the first bubble burst in Silicon Valley, because, a little bit of what led to that and what companies learned is when you go public, you have to do reports and there's all these filing reports. And so everything, like, if you know how to read the reports, what a company's planning because they have to say so, right? All these SEC filings say what their plans are for the next couple of years, or at least the year. And so any public company can't really keep their information that closely held. And so you started to see this second wave of kind of the bubble or, the boom in Silicon Valley. All these companies were staying private and they were getting big investment, but they weren't public. They weren't doing IPOs. They were staying very closely held because they wanted to hold on to their secrets, which allows for part of what happened with Theranos. Because if they had been, that company was around for 10 or 12 years, right? It's not like this happened overnight. And if they had been, 5 years in, they do an IPO, they would have to be doing SEC filings annually that, among other things, would publish the results of the testing.
I see. This would have been exposed earlier.
This would have been exposed much earlier, right? And I'm not passing judgment on it. It's just this, to me, it's this fascinating thing of like how many things have to come together in the right way to go that catastrophically wrong, right? I mean, like, I'm not sure you could a little bit like, I have my doubts as to whether or not anyone could consciously pull that off.
It takes chutzpah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I get that, I almost want, my take on it, like my takeaway from this is that there was, and maybe to this day, like she thinks this would going to work and she just needs the longer runway and she'll do whatever she needs to do to get that runway to finally get to where it works. And if that means fooling people because she's doing something, she's taken a long view. She's taken this, like she's got a 20-year plan. And if she has to beg, borrow, and steal and cut corners, or not even cut corners, like if she's got to really, really act unethically, that's okay because she's going to get to something that's going to change the world. And I don't really think that's the right thing, but I kind of get it. Whereas if you consciously set out to fleece people like, oh, my end goal is to like take a bunch of this money and run, I don't think you could do it.
I'm not sure that's what her intention was. I do suspect that she did think she was going to change the world. But,
right.
And like Oliver North just told herself that the ends justify the means. Anyway, I'm saying 7.8.
I like this more than you. I'm saying 9.
Okay, our number is an 8.4. It's at 76% on the tomato meter.
I think it's worth watching though. And again, like this, I think if you are wondering kind of what the mindset, because I think there's a lot of this mindset going on in kind of corporate startup in general, but especially in that Silicon Valley mentality. Like it's a really good snapshot of the way, at least my experience and the way people think.
Indeed. So I will now do the Alonzo spiel. Follow us, please, on the various social media platforms that exist out there for your enjoyment. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We are at BeFast all day. At all of them, we are a podcast. It's probably where you're listening to us right now. Right. And we are
on YouTube.
We're on YouTube. We're on iTunes. Hello, YouTube.
On Pinterest? We're not on Pinterest.
I don't think so.
TikTok?
We are not on Pinterest because I suck at crafts. Right. So, but we're on all of the
MySpace.
We're on the face space and all of the platforms where you find podcasts.